Hey everybody, it's Dale Earnhardt Jr. back again for another guest segment brought to you by Ally. And we have an awesome guest coming on today, Derrike Cope, Daytona 500 champion, car owner. He's done a little bit of everything in this sport, and I want to find out what he's up to today. It's going to be a great conversation, so let's learn about Derrike Cope and see where he's been. The following is a production of Dirty Mo Media. All right, so back in the studio, going to have a great guest come in this room any minute now, Derrike Cope, and want to thank Ally for bringing us the guest segment every single week. They do so much in this sport, and we're so thankful for them. And, yeah, week after week, we just keep having some great times in here, some great conversations. I don't know much about Derrike Cope. Now, I was around. I know when he raced and what he raced for the most part, but I never really talked to the guy. I was really, really good friends with some people on a particular team that he raced for, that very beautiful Purelator Chevrolet that he drove in the 90s or the early 90s. But I never really got to know Derrike all that much. And so, yeah, this will be great for me. We're all going to learn a lot about this guy and what makes him tick. And he's outside in the waiting room, so let's bring him on in. Here's your seat, your headphones. So Derrike Cope, I'm excited to have you here. I have, we don't know each other all that great, but I do. I know. I mean, you know, I grew up watching NASCAR all my life, so I watched you run a lot of races. And I want to know, what are you doing these days? First off, where'd you come from?
I came from Salisbury. My wife and I, Alicia, live in Salisbury. That's kind of where we migrated to start the Cup team for Starcom.
Yep.
So that was 2017, and so that's where I came from. And you know, now I'm just we're kind of piddling a little bit and helping my cousin Nick out.
What is your cousin Nick doing?
He runs a Nitro Motorsports. He has a Trans Am team. He does also a karting program called Nitro, and he does a GR Cup for Toyota. So
what do you do with that?
I crew chief some races, like the Trans Am stuff in Spot, and I do a lot of the shock absorber stuff. You know, I kind of involve in, you know, some of the things we do with the shock stuff and things like that. And then I also once a month do instructing at Skip Barber. So
really,
yeah.
Where does that take you?
VIR.
Okay.
Yeah, so they have a new facility up there, and they asked me to come up there. You know, I was close to, you know, to get there logistically, and they have me come up once a month, and I do a lot of their corporate outings, you know, for like BF Goodrich and or Michelin. So
yeah. How old are you?
I'm 65.
Yeah. Good Lord.
Yeah.
You're taking good care of yourself.
Oh, thanks.
You look good.
I don't know about that, but
what's it like? I mean, what? I'm 50, or I'm turning 50 in October.
Yeah.
What's the next 15 years like?
It's not bad for a while, and then all of a sudden it seems like all the wrecks, they start kind of filtering in, and you know, you start waking up with aches and pains, and now I have a hitch in my get along, and sometimes I look like Quasimodo when I get up in the morning. So you know, but for the most part, you know, I'm never really sick. I feel good, and I get to go to the racetrack a lot with Nick, so I'm enjoying life.
Yeah, busy mind and busy body, I think, keeps you kind of young.
I think so too.
So born in San Diego, and shortly after that you moved to Spanaway, Washington. How were you introduced to racing?
My father and uncle, I had three, you know, my father and his two brothers, Jerry and Guy Cope, along with my father Don. They were drag racers. They were professional touring drag racers. So they were sending money home to us in San Diego, and they were up in the Pacific Northwest and traveling around the nation drag racing, Top Fuel drag racing, and then later on the twin motor Top Gas cars. So from there, he was offered a job by Walt Austin, and we moved to Tacoma, and then ended up starting their own engine rebuilding facility. And that's really what my introduction into motorsports was, because they started in drag racing and then eventually kind of escalated to doing some NASCAR West Coast Grand National type racing.
Were they building motors for some of the West Coast guys?
Yes.
And so did they have a car? Was there a physical car in your presence somewhere?
No, we really, I was doing other things, you know, sports related.
You were an athlete.
Yeah, I played baseball and had aspirations to, you know, to play professionally. But I loved motorsports, so I travel with at 16, I was going with a top fuel car to, Southern California. And so always doing something, grinding camshafts in my dad's facility at 14 and being introduced to, the makings of running, an engine shop, because that was our livelihood.
Yeah. So when did you get the opportunity to drive anything?
1979. I'd come off of a severe knee injury and career ending. And my brother, my cleat got stuck in the grass. I was trying to come back. I saved like a ball from going to the dugout, and then I tried to come back across myself and throw to third. And my cleat got stuck, and I had a complete blowout. And severed everything, and I had to have a hamstring transfer. You name it.
Jeez.
Yeah.
That sounds terrible.
Yeah, it wasn't good.
All right. How old were you?
I was, I want to say 20.
And the medical procedure for that probably wasn't what it is today. So you're done playing sports. Was that difficult?
Yes, I think at that point, when you're young and you maybe a bit naive too, you really feel like you have the capabilities to keep going in that vein. And when that happened, I woke up on the operating table. It was 6 hours instead of 3.5 or 3, and then my knee never really went straight for 3 years, and so it really was. You knew it was over, and I was fortunate enough that my brother was kind of just getting involved with a stock car. And
whose?
My brother. He had my dad was doing engines for a lot of people.
Yep.
So Steve Hemholtz had this old Chevelle. We called her the Gray Ghost because she was in primer and stock stub, with a cage in it, right? The old days of racing. And he pretty much gave us to us and
gave you the car.
He gave us the car, and basically my dad, I don't know, he may have done something, I don't know, but that's how Darren started. My brother Darren, and then I was at home watching soap operas and decided that was not the best course of action, and I was going to have to get out of the house. So I had this old Vega and used a crutch so I could, use that as a throttle. I had a cast from, my hip to my ankle, and started watching what he was doing, and that led me to getting involved. So
you're just going to the track and helping your brother. How does the opportunity for you to drive become? Well, after I, had gone through the rehabilitation or whatever, I really kind of had succumbed to the fact that I was going to go to work for my father and his business. And then we got that race car and we took it to Spanaway Speedway, which was right there in, our neighborhood, and drove it for the first time. And I was, completely engulfed in wanting to drive that, and I just fell in love with it. And are you and your brother sharing the car? We were sharing the car. Man, I had a brother. We shared a street stock. Yeah. So how'd that work? What was the process? Well, we both worked on the car, and we would work on it after we worked at the race engine shop. So it was pretty much in the evenings and stuff, and it took a lot of time and energy. And my dad was adamant that you had to learn how to do every aspect of things, and so we shared the ride every other week. We'd go race, and Darren was the Carroll Yarborough, go for every hole, and it would close up and we'd tear it up. And I was a little more on the reserve side and a little more methodical in my approach, and but it was a fun thing because my brother and I have always gotten along exceptionally well, and we love each other dearly, and he's been very supportive of what I've done and I've of his. Yeah. And so we did that for a year, and then things changed. So what changed? Darren didn't really want to. He loved to drive the race car, but he didn't really want to work on the car. Darren liked to go to the lake and play slow pitch and do a lot of other things. And my dad said, you're going to have to work on this thing if you're going to do this. And I said, I want to do it. So at that point, I took over the car and I started working on the car. I did the engines for the car. I started really trying to push and drive myself towards that. This car, what would you consider what this car is today? Where would you put that car in what category? Street stock? Would it be a sportsman car? Late model? At that time, it was called late model sportsman. Yeah. And it was really, in this time and age, I guess it would be more of like I don't know if you'd call it it was a stock stub deal, right? Yes. So it'd be like a street stock probably, yeah. Right? But a little on steroids, yes. Right? Because they had the NASCAR motors with, Broda, or the they made probably in the 500 horsepower range, okay. Right? So they were pretty stout, really, yeah. Right? But a beast. How long did you drive this car? I drove that car through 79, and then
actually what moved on me forward was that Jackie Cooper, who was running the late model Sportsman division, and at that time it was kind of unique because the late model Sportsman cars could run with Winston West, which was the Grand National Series.
Yeah.
So they were tubular frame cars, and this car that Jackie had was a stock clip car, but we did the engines for it, and Jackie was retiring, and he had wrecked the car, and so I got the car for nothing. Basically, Jackie gave it to us because we had sponsored him for engines for all this time, and then I had to go put a stock clip on it myself. And Dave Fuge was working.
I know that name.
You know Dave Fuge, yeah. Dave Fuge was working for Bill Schmidt in Southern California, and he told me over the phone how to go put a clip on. So I went to J.J. Safino's place there and put a subframe on it.
Your goal, I guess, is to make it to Winston West, which is basically at that time the carbon copy or the brother or companion to Cup racing as we knew it here on the East Coast. And so, having done a little bit of research and read some books, Ray Elder and a couple other guys that were winning championships in the West Series, and they ran really well when NASCAR and the big, the Cup boys would come to Riverside and so forth. I mean, Ray even won a couple races against Richard Petty and all the East Coast guys. So, I mean, it was I'm trying to see if you can help me and everyone listening understand what Winston West was. I don't think there's anything today that compares to it. It's not comparable to the K&N West Series as we know it today. It was literally the NASCAR Cup Series just on the West Coast. And same cars, same approach. And that was really where you wanted to get to, right? So help me understand, what was, when you're living out there in the early 80s, what was Winston West racing like?
Winston West Grand National Racing, as you had the same title to it as the Grand National Series, right, on the East Coast, right? So Riverside was run, every November, and basically the cars that we were racing in the Winston West Series were the same cars to run Winston Cup. So guys like Harry Jefferson, Roy Smith, a lot of those guys were going east, and they ran Rockingham, they ran Daytona, and were very proficient. And like guys like Roy Smith were very proficient road racers, along with Jimmy Insolo, right? So that was, and we were doing engines for the Lakes Drywall Special out of Tacoma, and the guys that drove for that was like Chuck Bowen, who made it to the Xfinity Series, Jimmy Insolo, and those are the guys that were kind of the top echelon of the Winston West Series. And so they would go to Riverside and run. And my aspirations were, to get to that point, initially. And George Jefferson, who was the only Ford on the West Coast, and Harry Jefferson, they'd been Daytona, Rockingham, Charlotte, and been successful, decent. And they didn't want to travel no more, so I ended up I ran my first year in the late model Sportsman, won a race in 1980, and then George offered me a ride in 81, and that was my springboard to really getting myself into a position to go Grand National racing.
What did that car look like?
The car that I drove for George was an old Ford Fairmont, and he also had a this old Cougar, and these were like hutch cars and banjo cars. Yeah. And I remember
came from the East Coast.
Came from the East Coast. And the engines were actually, back then, were the Australian block Cleveland motors. That Parkinol, a name from back here, was doing some work for him. And then I ended up that was part of my deal. I traded my services of building the engines to drive the car, for George.
So I remember Dad coming and running a race or two, right? He would do a one-off. He drove this white number 3 Monte Carlo in the mid 80s for one of the more proficient. I can't remember the guy's name. You might
probably
remember.
Bill Schmidt.
Yes, Bill. He drove one of his cars once, but he went over there and would race, and like Bobby Allison would run from time to time. Richard Petty. What was that like? I guess we all know that there was the Riverside event where it was a giant combination of both the West and the East Series of Grand National. But what was it like, I guess, when one Cup guy would come run one of the regular events at some of the tracks that you guys raced at regularly?
It was special. I think for me, obviously, I was involved in what you were talking about at some other point. Like 1980, when I had my own car, I was about out of money, and they brought Bobby Allison to Portland, Rose City Speedway, and I had not won a race yet, and Bobby drove my car and lapped the field, and pretty much, taught me a lot of things. I mean, he had a little small steering wheel, and he said, do you have a problem with this car pushing all the time? I said, yeah, terribly. He goes, well, we need to get a bigger steering wheel. So I went over, and Leon Martinson had an old sprint car. I sent Leon over to his place there in Portland, brought back this big old steering wheel. We put it on there, and from that point forward, I went out and won a race, and it didn't push no more, So you learn things, and then that saved me because he won the race. I got some money to do it, and then later on, I had Tim Richmond drive my car twice.
Really?
Yeah, Tim came out and drove my car twice, and when I ended up losing the championship in the the Winston West deal at Riverside for the Rookie of the Year deal, he was driving my car at Riverside, and I have memories of I had cracked an oil pan. I was running second to Bill Schmidt, about to take the lead, and then oil pan was leaking. They black flagged me, and I was still in the hunt for the championship.
Yeah.
And Tim was standing in front of me going like this, and so a lot. And I got to know Tim a lot more when I came back here.
Yeah. So how does that deal work out? Like how does Tim Richmond? What's the phone call? What somebody calls you and says, we got Tim Richmond wants to race. He wants to come run it.
It was Ken Clapp. Owen Kearns, Ken Clapp was kind of the guys that ran the Winston West Series. And Kim was instrumental in, really getting relationships between R.J. Reynolds and the drivers. And I was doing a lot of public speaking for R.J. Reynolds and functions. And he was instrumental. He knew we needed funding. And when these guys, they wanted to bring him in to promote the series. And, Winston was doing all the stuff for all the local short tracks back then. So that's how it was happening.
Talk about the years, I guess, working your way up to becoming that championship contender in the West Series.
It was really when I went to George. The first year we didn't run well because the cars were relatively antiquated and and not really that proficient. And then Dave Fuge started building his own cars out there. It was a real first tubular chassis, for the late model Sportsman deal, and that was really what really started an escalation of my notoriety. I think with Dave's car and George Jefferson, the only Ford. We went out and I think we won the Apple Cup, which was the huge first race, and then we won I think we had sat on pole 13 or 17 times and had lots of wins, and so that kind of put us in a position where George wanted to go Grand National racing.
Yeah.
So we built a car. It was an Ivan Baldwin car, and
what do you mean?
Well, Ivan Baldwin was out of Southern California. Ivan actually came back here, but he built cars out there. Jerry Baxter worked for Ivan Baldwin, and I stayed, at Jerry or down at Ivan's place. We built that Winston West car, and we started traveling. And so my first Cup race was 1982. Started in 1980, basically. In 1982, I went to Riverside.
And you go race and you go make the field in the Cup race.
Yes.
There's probably a lot of cars there that didn't make the field because it was a conjunction race between the West and the East. What did your car look like?
Our car was really a pretty blue with a JR with candy apple red stripes that went back with the number 95 on it.
That's right.
Yeah, Jackie Johnson was my crew chief and dear friend, and he painted all those cars in lacquer and hand buffed them, hand color sanded them, and they were the most beautiful cars you'd ever seen.
You got your first start in 82. What's the process from there that gets you to the East Coast?
We ran for Rookie of the Year. I think 80. I got some Ford backing, and I got 7-Eleven, Chief Auto Parts, and Citgo involved, and that was through Dave Fulton, and that was through Ford Motor Company and Campbell and Company. Yeah. So I kind of got a little bit of a factory deal from them, and that was really what really kind of gave us the, I think the look of being tied with Kyle Petty when they had all of that, right?
Yeah.
And so we went the Winston West route, and we won races and sat on poles, and we're starting to make a name for ourselves. And I think I was doing a lot of public speaking. I was doing a lot of things for Winston at that point, and promoting the series. And one thing led to another, and we got to come back east. I ran Richmond in '84.
How How did you?
We just decided to come back.
You just said,
and
"Hey,
try.
We're taking all our stuff. We're going to go run this.
We're going to go run Richmond." George had done it before with Harry.
Yeah.
And he said, "Let's go to Richmond," and that was where Dave Fulton knew the Sawyers really well,
Yep.
and so we went there and made the race, and I think we ended up getting wrecked in it, but made the race on our own merit.
You're proficient racing, successful in the West Series. The East Series is there. Are you wanting to be in the East Series, and what is the realistic opportunity and route for that? What was the examples before you of how people had made that transition?
No one had ever done it.
Right. And so I always I think that when I was younger, I didn't credit the West Coast Series as I felt like it was a lesser than all the technology and all the knowledge and all the people, and the East Coast was just a bigger machine, right? And then as I've since really become an admirer of some of the particular drivers and how they would, Ray Elder being one of the best examples, how they would come compete and win and do well when they would compete against the East Coast Series. So I want you to kind of take us into the mindset of like, how steep did that mountain seem to you? To like, man, we want to. I went to this race. I went to Richmond. We exhausted all this effort to get there and go do it. We take home the wrecked race car, and I don't have any example of before me any kind of a roadmap of how to get to the East Coast and get there and stay there, right? And make find roots in this side of the sport. So where were you mentally there, and how did you make it work?
Certainly, you knew that it was going to take funding to be able to come east, and we really didn't have that with George's deal and the 7-Eleven thing. So, at that point, I had been, introduced to a very prominent businessman out of Seattle named Warren Rizzori and Steve Banchero. They owned, like one of the only 2 garbage collection companies there, and had a lot of wherewithal. And they had asked if we had discussions. They wanted to go East Coast. They wanted to go to Cup racing. So it was a hard decision to leave George and that deal, because he pretty much was my mentor and really the reason why I had the success that I had, along with Jackie Johnson, the crew chief. But the opportunity to go east included one of the crew members off of that team and Jackie Johnson, the crew chief, because he actually worked for Bud Moore and Joe Fazan and a bunch of people. Was born in Campobello, South Carolina. So I signed the deal with him. We moved, 3 of us moved back and moved to Campobello, South Carolina, and worked with Leroy Mabry's shop right there, and right around. Got to know James Hilton and everybody, and became like a nice little fixture in South Carolina. And we started that deal there. And that's
what deal?
Well, we had it was Western Peterbilt Trucks, and they sponsored the car. And
who owned this car?
Warren Rizzori and Steve Banchero.
What did this car look like?
This car was beautiful again because Jackie did it all in lacquer. It was white, silver, and red, and it had number 79 on it in silver. Man. And first race for that,
Ford, right?
Ford
Thunderbird.
Yeah, first race went to Martinsville and sat between Gant and Bonnet. Qualified 17th, finished 9th. And that was our deal, And the 3 of us, I lived in a little, 1-bedroom apartment above a garage, and we had 3 of us there. We built that car. It was a Laughlin car.
No family,
Nope, just me.
Just you.
Just me. And that really was the
Did you have relationships back west?
I had a girlfriend back there that I left on Christmas Day twice. To go back east, after one deal. When that deal started, I left Christmas day after Christmas, left her there, unfortunately. And then when this deal kind of went sideways and I went back home, I had to go because I was under contract. I left the day after Christmas, got to put another deal together.
What deal went sideways?
Well, the Warren Rizzori deal went sideways. We only ran, maybe, not very many races. Yeah. And he wanted it close to home. He wanted to be the big fish in the little pond, not the little fish in the big pond, and I think decided to take it home. So he said we need to come home and run Winston West. So I went back and I ran the street course race in the streets of Tacoma around the Tacoma Dome and sat on the pole and ended up second, ran out of fuel. And I asked Warren, I said, look, I have had a taste of the East Coast, and I feel like that's where I belong and that's where I want to go. And I said, if I can find a deal, a legitimate deal, will you let me out of my 3-year contract? And he said, yes. And I'm a man of my word. I'll let you out. And so I went to the banquet that year for the Winston West Series and met Fred Stoke. And Fred Stoke was from Lakeport, California, and he wanted to go cup racing. And I
said, meet this guy
yes.
at the banquet?
Yes.
And you're like, hey, in conversation, you're like...
he's asking me.
He's asking you.
Because I've been here.
He's like, East Coast, what do you think?
Yeah, exactly. I said, well, I'm under a 3-year contract. I said, but Warren told me if you called him and you had a legitimate deal to take me back cup racing, he would let me out of my contract.
So what did you do?
I got Fred to call on the phone with Warren, and Warren said it was a legitimate deal. I went back in with Warren, and Warren said, sounds like you got a real deal going there. And I said, yeah. I said, will you let me out of my contract? And he said, yes.
So you and Stoke and his checkbook, where'd you go?
Day after Christmas, I left again. Went down to California, picked up his stuff, drove it across the southern route this time instead of across the middle of, and went back, and we settled in Hendersonville, North Carolina. And a guy named, I think it was Bill, I can't remember his name now. He was the crew chief that Fred had kind of put together, but it was a banjo deal with Banjo, and I got to know Banjo that way. And Bill Edwards, he was the crew chief, and we started the process all over again. And
Banjo on the car?
No, it was Fred Stoke. It had Stoke Racing on it. It was the 19 car with all red, I think, and that I went to Daytona and made the race.
Yeah,
qualified through the 125.
What was that like? Was that first time you ever ran Daytona?
Yes.
What was that like? I mean, this is 87?
It was 87.
87?
Yeah.
So what was your first thoughts of going around Daytona?
Well, I had tested, at Talladega with the deal before, and so I already had some sense of, what it's about. But I'd been to Daytona in '83 with Jackie just because we won the late model Sportsman Championship, and I loved being there. And
did you race?
No, just went to watch.
Yeah.
And sat in the stands when Cale flipped it, and all that. And so when I drove into Daytona, he said we're going to Daytona, we didn't have a fast enough car to really make the race on speed by any means. So it was the 125. And yeah, I drafted my way in it, and we made the race, finished in the top 14, and it was on from there.
All right, so what did y'all get accomplished in '87? So you had a best finish of 13th at Martinsville, missed out on the Rookie of the Year, so you competed the entire season?
No, we only had enough money to run 12 races.
Oh my.
Had to run for Rookie of the Year against Davey Allison, who had a full deal with the Gates, right? We actually sat on the outside pole at Michigan. First time we went there, the motor broke, so I didn't get to start the race because when I shut the thing, last practice, doing a plug check, motor ran backwards and sheared the timing pin off. We didn't know it till the morning because we were out in the rain, and then everybody's trying to help us. We had a spare motor, but no time to get going. So we only ran, a handful, a number of races, maybe 10 or 11 maybe, right? But we finished 6th at Charlotte, 9th at Charlotte, 11th in other places.
Yeah, these are great runs.
We had some great runs, and then sat on the outside pole at Michigan, went back, qualified 10th when we tried to, because everybody said it was, we were cheating or whatever, so I went back and I qualified 10th, and Rusty was 20th.
Yeah. And so what are people calling you? Are you starting to, you're doing things that are getting some attention? Well,
it was kind of the time of the real major happening in my life because Fred ran out of money. Mm-hmm. We were in Hendersonville in this little place. Yeah, two cars, right? Yeah. And I basically was, going to the races, just trying to, make opportunities, right, be seen. And we come back, and Fred had loaded everything up and turned the lights off, turned the power off, and went back to California. And here we are. That time, that was Dave Fuge, myself, and Jim Fox, 3 of us. And we were I was destitute. I was working for food. I was not getting paid. So I was working for food, a place to live, and, eating. And so I really didn't have much to draw from at that point, and pretty much maxed out credit card. But I had Bird Dogs trying to find sponsorship for me, and that's when I got the call from Purelator.
How?
This guy had been kind of pitching, me in this deal. Purelator had been heard that they wanted to go back racing. It was ironic because the race that I went back and ran when I had to go back home and run that Streets of Tacoma race, in defeat, I was on the PA talking about the race, and Carol Warner and his wife Sue were he was the president of Purelator, and they were listening to me talk about it, and they were the ones that decided to go back racing, take Purelator brand back racing. And he wanted him and his wife. And I'm still friends with them today. I talk to them once or twice a month and go see them. And he said, your name came up from my wife and said, what about that kid from Tacoma? And Sue said, he spoke well and, he can definitely drive. And so they called me to Tulsa. So my only suit I had and a ticket to Tulsa, and I was about destitute, and I put the deal together.
So you got some money from Purelator. Purelator's coming back. And what team do you pair up with?
Well, there was only $400,000 to work with. They kept $25,000 for marketing, so I had $375,000. And come back home, and I'd been working with Pat Patterson, and so Pat had on-road production, pit road productions, and he got a hold of Jim Testa. And Jim Testa was working with Elmo Langley.
Yep.
It was Elmo Langley's equipment. So very old, antiquated equipment. And we only had $375,000, and Jim Testa took the deal. And we went racing in 88.
With the 68 car.
That's correct.
And so those were, Elmo Langley's cars.
Yes.
Clark Dwyer and all kinds of people have been wearing those things out.
Oh, yeah.
And I guess that's right around the time when Elmo just got out altogether and went to driving the pace car.
It is.
And so Jim Testa, though, was not new to owning cars. He'd been around. Lenny Pond drove his cars, and other people had drove his cars from time to time. So that deal went well, went bad. What was your experience like?
Well, again, you're talking about a low caliber, low tier team, and me trying to serve my apprenticeship for my first full season, really, trying to see all the racetracks for the first time. So I think it went as well as you could expect. You're learning, and we were having some misfortune and running decent, right, for what we had. But through that process, money became tight, and also Jim's health started deteriorating a little bit. And so he come to me and said, I have to quit. I can't do this anymore. Mm-hmm. So at that point in time, that's when Bob Whitcomb had Bouchard driving, right? And they were struggling, trying to find funding.
No funding.
And no
Blank
funding.
car.
Yeah, nothing, right? And using his money, so Bob was funding it. So I went to, talk to Carol Warner at Purelator, and I said, can I, I have some money left. And I said, can I go look for another team? He said, by all means, let's go find another team. Let's see if we can take and salvage this year, right? So I went to Bob and broached the subject with him, and he was all over it. And I felt bad for Kenny, but it was a way for us to, and I had been putting the deals together, so I had already knew that I could have this deal for next year, and I thought that I was going to be able to, if I could salvage it, I could get them to continue on, and that was the case. Bob took the deal on. He took it. He met with Carol at Purelator, struck a deal, and then we went on and finished the year. Yeah.
I was very close. I talked to Mike all the time.
Yeah.
He texted me the other day, Mike Whitcomb, Bob's son.
Yeah.
This is a really fun connection for me to your career. I used to run around in the garage with Mike and all our other buddies, Brad Means, Jimmy Means' son, and a bunch of other folks. And we'd run in and out of y'all's holler and stuff. And this is right around that time frame that you started driving for that team. I remember hanging out at Mike's house and building models of y'all's car and and I've got T-shirts in my closet with you on them. So I remember Bob and his guys felt like they had a bunch of Pontiacs, and that when you come to drive the cars, they eventually would get reskinned into the Chevrolets that are kind of the more iconic, bright pink, beautiful race car. Yeah, just an insanely beautiful race car. One of my favorite cars that raced in the Cup Series. Bob, was he close to shutting that thing down before you partnered up with him with the Purelator funding?
Yes. I think he had resigned himself to the fact that he was, putting it in his inheritance, and the company that was sold, an aggregate company, construction company up there, and he was desperately close to putting it away, and so we kind of were able to kind of like have a little bit of success, and then when I put the deal together for them to come back the next year, that kind of was like a lifeline that got thrown, and that's when we were able to escalate the thing and went after Buddy Parrott.
Yeah.
And that's really changed the whole dynamic of the team.
Yeah. So explain why Buddy Parrott is so good. I mean, explain what he did when he walked into the room and how it transcended or changed the race team.
Buddy is one of those guys that's like bigger than life. I think he's infectious, you know, the way that he instills confidence in people. He's fun to be around, yet very stern and demands greatness out of you. And I think he really tries to draw what's good out of you and, you know, instill confidence in you and prove that, you know, we could do this collectively. And he was a great motivator of people. And I knew he had a wealth of experience and knowledge, but he'd kind of like gotten out of the sport to some degree. And our first conversations, he really wasn't all that excited, you know, and we talked him into it. And he did. He accepted the deal, and that was really a major turning point for this race team. We had a bunch of young people, but talented guys.
Yeah.
And you know, next thing you know, and he had such relationships. You know, he had Robert G. You know, he knew all the right people, and Buddy knew he was a Mr. Fix-It. If the car was loose, he'd get it tight. If the car was tight, he'd get it loose, and he knew strategy. He knew what you needed to do to win races because he'd seen it done so many times and done it himself. And I think he just instilled that in all of us, and the thing just took off.
You've heard us talk a lot about FanDuel, America's #1 sports book. Well, we have something a little different for you. Now through September 22nd, all FanDuel customers can bet $5 and they will get a free trial for 3 weeks of NFL Sunday Ticket from YouTube and YouTube TV. Then with a YouTube TV base plan, you'll be able to watch every regular season Sunday afternoon out-of-market game. All you need is a Google account and a current form of payment, and you can cancel anytime. Just visit FanDuel.com/Dale to download America's #1 sportsbook. 21 plus and present in North Carolina, full price of NFL Sunday Ticket will be automatically charged seasonally after free trial. No refunds, terms, restrictions, and embargoes apply. Gambling problem? Call 877-718-5543 or visit morethanagame.nc.gov. I want to obviously talk about the Daytona 500 because you go drive for this team mid-1989. Bob Whitcomb's considering whether he wants to continue. You show up at Daytona, a completely revamped, reshaped program entirely. Even the visual look of the car and everything was just completely different. And so you went from this, you know, kind of a traditional red Purolator Pontiac to this bright pink, could not miss it, eye-catching, attention-getting outfit. And Buddy Parrott is the crew chief, which got everybody's attention as well. And so, and the other thing, you talked about the talented people. When you look at the victory of Daytona, there's a blonde guy that jumps off pit wall as the team begins to celebrate, Richie Gilmore. You had incredible motors and put a lot of, you know, Bob and you and everyone were investing in the right areas to make a difference on the racetrack. I want you to walk us through January to February. When you walk into the shop and you're looking at your brand new Lumina that's getting built for Daytona, I'm sure you obviously see the difference in the type of race car that you're preparing over what you had last year for this race, and you had to have been pretty excited about it. But I imagine you probably went to Daytona or maybe Talladega, but likely Daytona, and tested for 3 or 4 days and all kinds of laps in this car. When is it starting to did you realize, I guess, before you got to Speed Weeks that you had the kind of car that could win that race?
You know, that was really, you know, coming on the second year of the restrictor plate. And, you know, Buddy, actually, I didn't really see the car for a while because the car was being constructed at Robert G's. Mm. So in his little place there, you know, up behind Darrell Waltrip, still at the Speedway, and, you know, Buddy would go there every day, every night, and those two would sit up there. And, I mean, it was kind of like the old, you know, Days of Thunder-ish thing, right? They're building this car and massaging, and I mean, it had the fenders draped over the front, over the back tires as well. You know, everything was about speed, you know, and Buddy pretty much with Robert G, did this car together. And so when I first saw it back at the shop, of course, there was a deal with the changing of the color like you talked about. Pure Later was rebranding. There was a talk of the Dayglow, and Buddy was instrumental a little bit of that too, because, he'd had that with Petty's and, said, hey, look, we need something that stands out. And so they went with this rocket red Dayglow color, and they put the checkerboard, which became kind of like the branding, of all the packaging of the brand of Pure Later. So, it was their entry back. And that car, I'm telling you, it was beautiful at the shop. And then we went to Daytona to test, and the car was really fast. We did not, much to everybody's thoughts that it was a Hendrick motor deal. We did have a limited engine program. We didn't have enough money to have a full-year engine program, so we basically had X amount of races with Hendricks. But this was a Keith Dorton engine. Oh. Randy Dorton's brother at Automotive Specialist, right, Concord. It was his engine.
Okay.
And it was his first entry into the restrictor plate deal. But I'm sure he parasited some knowledge from Randy or got ideas on which direction to go. But this is his own engine, and Buddy put that together for us for Daytona. We went down there and we were fast. And the car drove exceptionally well. The car's balance was relatively free all the time, but it was fast. Yeah. And, we knew we had a really quality car. And that really set the tone for going back to Daytona. And when we got back for Speed Weeks, we were probably one of the faster cars in practices. And we knew that if we could take care of this thing, with my limited experience, that we had a shot.
So do you remember much about the week?
Mm-hmm. A lot, actually. Yeah, it was. I remember, some of it's kind of vague, but I remember being in the practice sessions. I remember, our conversations with Buddy. And once Buddy saw how good we were in practice, I mean, we were probably only in one cars that really could deal, other than Schrader. Schrader was lights out, right?
Yeah, he was so fast.
But we were right there. And at that time is when Buddy started telling me, okay, look, here's the plan. Daytona always has a late race caution. We are going to ride. We are going to survive. We are not going to tear this thing up. We are going to drive within ourselves and stay on the lead lap, stay in a position to be, to have a shot. And he said, here's what I want you to do. Every practice session, when Dale goes out, you go out with Dale. I want him to see you all the time. And that was straight from Buddy. He said, if he goes in the bathroom, I want you to follow him in the bathroom. He said, I want him to see you all the time. Yeah. And that was just Buddy's, his method, methodology of how to keep us in the focus of in somebody's mind. Yeah. Because Dale was the guy you had to beat. Yeah. And he was the most, the guy hadn't won it, and he is the guy that wants it the worst. So you're going to have to beat him. Yeah. So that's what we did. And sure enough, that morning before the race, Dave Despain comes over and says, well, what do you think? And I said, I feel like we have a car that can win if I can keep it out of trouble. And certainly that's what the game plan was. So
I remember it felt like you ran second to Dad the entire race. Now, it probably was not exactly like that, but that's my short memory of the race. So you did everything Buddy asked you to do. As this race is playing out, as as you're getting further and further into the distance of the race, this is still relatively short in your career, and you've only been on the East Coast and Grand National for a couple of years. I wonder where you were mentally as you're approaching those final, 50 laps. As you're starting to see, your opportunity to have this really incredible day, right? A lot of times drivers, I think when I started, when I would get close to a really great run early in my career before I ever had success, you would oftentimes almost get nervous and maybe make mistakes or do something. But I'm wondering how you felt mentally in those final, 100 miles.
Well, I think as the race worked out, we really were kind of running fifth a lot, but the car was extremely free. And if you really, were able to dissect the race, Buddy was not going to put tires on. He was going to run. There wasn't a great deal of cautions anyways, but Buddy was always wanting to stay out on tires, get track position. He was all about track position, stay up out of the mess, stay up top. So we would run fifth on used tires. maybe put 2 tires on when everybody else was putting on 4. So the car was always in that position where I really had to be careful, and I always ran kind of like I was fast enough to be ahead of the guys that couldn't get to us, and then I could stay with that group. So I was kind of like running 5th, and then as the car, we got, further on in the race, I was able to kind of migrate to the front and be 2nd and stay out of trouble again. But as you're getting closer to the end, the intensity level starts getting higher and higher because we are up front and we're staying there. So this, and Buddy, I'm telling Buddy the whole time is this thing is really free. That's why I always go to the high side, because I have to give the car its head, and I'm on used tires when they are at fresh tires, and so you're just constantly battling, trying not to hurt the car. And sure enough, that last stop, I come in, I said, Buddy, this thing's really loose. I said, and so he beats the spoiler down. We're putting left sides on, finally, putting on new tires somewhere, right?
Yeah.
And so he puts left sides on, and I watch him, and he's beating the spoiler down. Bah, 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 bah. I'm thinking, this thing is so loose now, he must, I'm hoping the left sides are going to tighten this thing up, and but more speed comes. And now I've got a little bit of grip, and, that was the last time we changed tires. And it was escalating. But, yeah, the anxiety, intensity was moving up, but I knew I had to be calm, and I had to be patient and have a shot.
So Dad runs over a piece of a bell housing going down the back straightaway. A lot of times, me and you driving race cars, we can see a speck of dirt we can see a penny laying on the racetrack as we're approaching it. You're so in tune, and your mind is so elitely trained to pick up these visuals. So in the video of the cars going down the back straightaway, you see this sort of thing come flying out from behind Dad's car. Not sure exactly whether the tire's tearing the crush panel out or what's happening there, but what do you remember about going down that back straightaway? I don't know that, I don't know that. Are you thinking about what type of run I can put together, or how I might be able to put anything together on the 3 car? And then do you see visually what's happening to him? What's your thoughts there?
I had the last few laps was really, pretty much embedded in my mind, because Elliott and Labonte, they had tried to put a run on me, and they'd had nothing for me. So I knew that I really just had to use them to get to Dale. And in the last lap, we're coming down there, and Labonte was getting me loose getting in. I still only had old tires on, and I had to keep going to the high side, and I kept going to the high side all the time, and all of a sudden, and your dad, he keeps moving up the racetrack. He knows that he needs to take, the air away, and needs to get up in front of me, because that's where I was getting a run to get back to him. And so he migrated up there, and then I lost ground that lap going into 1. I'm on his bumper going into 1. Labonte gets me loose, and I just go to the top, and I lose, 3 car lengths or so, right? And down the back straightaway, I'm getting some momentum, though. The car's starting to get a surge, and so I knew that I would get back to his bumper if I went to the bottom, which I knew I had to get in there and preload the wheel. I had to get in there and go to the bottom no matter what. I had to just keep it on the bottom. So my whole intention was to drive to the bottom and I don't care what happens. And when I drove off in there, I started seeing, like you say, you saw some things come up and hit the car, and I don't know what they were, but there was some debris, and but things have slowed down at that point, right? Because it always does, right? You're traveling that speed, but it's slow motion to me. And then all of a sudden, same kind of thing like you see in Days of Thunder, his car starts to turn and it gets yawed out, and I'm on the bottom, and all of a sudden he's backing up to me. So the closing rate's coming, so things are picking up, and by the time I think we're just going to run in the back of each other, right? Because that's just, I'm gaining immensely. And all of a sudden, the car just goes whoop, and wiggles, and he drives to the right, and I drive by the bottom. Yeah. And at that point, you know what's happened. It's like, I know I have this thing. If the bond of them have nothing for me.
Do you have a moment? So the camera, breaks away from you for a moment. I was wondering what you dealt with, or what you thought as you come up off of 4, right? Are you like looking in the mirror, going, are they putting anything together? What? Because there's probably this process of, holy shit, I've just taken the lead of the Daytona 500, and the checkered flag's right around the corner. But then immediately, I think you would have a moment or a thought of, what is happening behind me? Did you have any
Oh yeah.
concern, I guess.
Oh yeah. I had all day. I'd kind of pedaled the car and had to really, be careful on used tires. And, from the time that last caution happened, I was wide open. He never lifted. I was like, we were in the mix. And as I got by your dad, when I drove by there, I looked in the mirror and I saw the gap that I had on the Bonnie. And I just figured, if I don't lift, if I don't have any kind of a moment here off the corner, they're going to have a difficulty getting me, because I could see Elliott was farther back too. So they weren't tucked up. So I just said, if you don't lift, we got this thing, you just got to block them. And, when I come off of 4 and I got to this, the flat, I was like just trying to just stay in front of them and move down and not take it. But yeah, at that point, you kind of felt like that there was a chance that you were just going to win this thing. And it was like total elation, and the radio went crazy.
Right. When did you realize what you had done?
When they come on the radio. I mean, it was, all I could hear was screaming. And, I didn't really, when you cross the start-finish line, you're just hearing all this screaming, you've won, but yet nothing really resonates with you at that point, right? Mm-hmm. You're just like, not exhausted, but you're just, wow, I can't even believe this, and, you put the window net down, you're riding around, and, I'm thinking about my dad. I mean, my dad and I had structured this whole thing 10 years ago, and, to reach the pinnacle, to the biggest thing can ever happen to you, I just had a reflection on my father and what we had done.
Do you remember when you come down pit road, what's the first thing you see?
Well, the first thing really was, Buddy on, there was lots of screaming and stuff, right? But then Buddy was on the deal. And when I was coming down pit road, obviously we're just trying to get ready to head to victory lane. We're not doing no.
Do you know where to go?
No. I said, Buddy, I said, I don't know where victory lane's at. And he starts laughing, and so he says, just keep coming down here. He says, we'll show you where it's at. And, Jim Fox, Teeny, he jumped on the deck lid as, I see me coming down. Jim was the guy that was with Dave Hughes and I in the 3-bedroom apartment above a garage in Hendersonville. Mm-hmm. And Jim was, a personal dear friend. And he jumped on the deck lid and we rode into victory lane together. And, that was it.
When you saw Bob Whitcomb, what was that like?
It was total elation for him. He's just hugging my neck and squeezing, and everybody was just, I think, really in disbelief, and excited. They're all young, they're all in really the infancies of their careers. A lot of them would go on to greatness and do other things, and stay in the sport. But it was really a moment in time that, they'd been rewarded for, believing in Buddy and believing in me and Bob to get to the highest point and all the money he had spent and nearly getting out of the sport. I think it was just a complete relief. And, and Greg and everybody, the same thing. They just were overwhelmed by emotion, I think.
You would appear on David Letterman. You would go on to win another race at Dover that year. I was at that track, watched you. Not a fluke win by any means. Had a really good car and a great strategy and led tons of laps. Bob's team would eventually be overcome by the financial strain that it was, that it is, being in the Cup Series. But I want to ask you, I have this experience myself. There's a happiness and a sadness for me when I look back on those type of moments like you had with Daytona. There's a happiness and thankfulness that it happened, but also a bit of a sadness that you didn't, not that it only happened once, but that you didn't know it was happening when it was happening. Does that make sense? When you think back on that moment, and I think a lot of drivers probably do this, and like I said, I myself sort of do this as well with some of the moments in my career, is like, when I just, you can't go back. You can never go back. And man, would you give anything to relive that? Because when it was happening, you really didn't realize what was happening and what you had done. And so I wonder if you feel those same emotions, I think, when you think back on winning that race and how incredible that was.
I think, if you're a race car driver and you're in the moment at the time, you're so driven about going on, and you think that it's going to continue to happen, and you don't really absorb everything that it presents to you at that point in time. And things happen so quick, especially in the form of NASCAR. The next week comes relatively quickly, so you don't have a lot of time to really dwell and absorb it all, right? And for us, it was a little different because we were called a fluke, and I think the whole thing of the way that we won it, although we were in a position to win, and that's the way that racing goes, but your father hadn't won the race prior to that and had so many problems with it, right?
Yeah.
So we caught the brunt of all of the things that people would say. If you had social media today, it would have been like merciless.
Right.
But we didn't have cell phones back then.
No kidding.
And we didn't have...
I didn't think about that.
...to deal with, right? So you only just had Speedway Scene and then the ridicule from your peers. So all you're hearing is that the word fluke became attached to the win.
Really?
And I think all of us, that worked there, including Buddy, it was kind of hard to take, and the biggest thing can happen to you and Bob, and yet there's an asterisk, by your name, right? So I think, I enjoyed going to, all the stuff up top, and doing the toasting at the Unical and all the things, and you just, what a moment, right, in time, and then you have to come back and get on a phone and call Pure later in Tulsa, and so when you leave though, and then you can keep having all this negativity, right, which social media does today in a lot of instances, right? Our whole focus was on, we have to win again. We can't be a one-hit wonder. We have to win again, but we need to do it in a fashion where there's no misgivings or things that would, say that we're just, we were given something, So that was the biggest thing that we took away from that. But yeah, I think with all of that, or in kind of surrounding that, you didn't get an opportunity really to enjoy it to the fullest degree of the word. And, you had to be relegated to going on quickly and, dealing with all that.
That's interesting. I hadn't thought about that. I didn't even think to ask it because when I was friends with Mike, I didn't view the race that way. I was wanting Mike's team to be successful because I enjoyed Mike's friendship and us hanging out at the track. And I think I even knew a little bit then because Mike would tell me, Mike and his brother were close to Bob, and Bob's was pretty transparent, I think, with his family about the business and the business model. And I think Mike shared with me at times how treacherous it was, how difficult it was for a team of y'all's caliber to compete. And so there was some genuine concern, about where the team could go and how it could continue. But I'd never thought about the emotional toll that the perception of that win might have had. What do you recall, I guess, of the dissolving of that team, and how did you go on to the next thing, and what do you recall, I guess, of Bob's operation coming to an end?
Well, I was pretty involved because I was the liaison with the sponsorship. I had the sponsorship. I dealt with the sponsorship, and I'd gone through 4 presidents. There was a lot of changeover with
tough.
Pure later, because I started with Carol Warner, and obviously Carol and I spent a lot of time talking about what transpired and what happened and his departure and who came in after that. So I went through 4 presidents, and it was bought by Pennzoil. So I was dealing with a lot of CEOs and presidents and trying to keep this thing going, right, and proving my worth, right. And so I knew everything was going on, and the demise really came because Buddy left.
Buddy leaves.
And
why did Buddy leave?
I don't know. I don't know. I think Buddy was one of those things where, like, he a free spirit. He just he did what he came to do, and he left out on a high. And he did other things, I think, with Rusty maybe or something. But he just, I don't know. He wanted away. Yeah. And Buddy was one of those things where then the next thing, but one thing about racing is it really is about the people, right? I think, you don't do this alone. Nobody does. Driver doesn't win alone. He does it with people. And when we lost Buddy, there was an influx of another crew chief, obviously the new racing, but he was not the crew chief. He was more of a team manager guy, and so it really didn't go the way we thought it would go. And at the same time, I'm fighting a different fight with sponsorship, trying to keep the money coming in. And then when the things kind of get to the point where we're not running as well, we don't have the motor programs that we had before, we're making different choices. Roman Baruta was the last president of Purolator, and they were getting ready to go public. So they're trying to keep all the money in the bottom line. So I know that, there's a lot going on, that this thing's probably going to go away. And certainly what happens is Roman Baruta approaches Bob. We went to Daytona to test, and he'd already been paid $1 million on the program and all. And Roman Baruta said, look, we're going public. We want to stop. We don't want to sponsor anymore. And you can keep the money that we gave you, but we want to leave. Will you let us out of the contract? So Bob, I guess, said yes. I think he didn't really want to put no more money in. Yeah. He already resigned himself that he'd accomplished what he accomplished, could go no further, and he made a very difficult decision for himself. And I'm making the most money I would make in the last year because of my personal services contract, and yet everything goes by the wayside, and then you're left holding the bag, and you have no ride at the beginning of the year after all the seats have been filled, and you're left with no sponsor and no driver and no pipeline for sponsors because you're not looking. And so you're kind of like, without anything.
Yeah. What'd you do?
I pretty much started trying to talk to who was out there and, what deals were opportunities. And then that's when the deal with Kale kind of came about. And no sponsor. They put me in a car to go to Daytona, and we ran really well. And then we were able to get Bojangles.
I remember that.
And then that thing
that car was really fast.
Yeah, it was. It had, the two engine builders were very, very talented people. Tony Santanicola and Bob Fisher. Bob Fisher now is running ECR, took over for Richie, and Tony's bit was with the Dodge deal with Arrington. So talented stuff. They always had great restrictor plate motors, and that's where we thrived. We ran really well there, and had a shot to win races at the restrictor plate races.
Yeah. So where do you go from Kale?
Actually, from there, I ended up going to, I think, Bobby Allison. And that was really probably the best race car that I probably drove, and the best group of people that I feel like that I drove for. But we had a lot of problems financially. But Jimmy Finnig, Keith Almond, Mike Basinger, all the guys there. I mean, I was going there every day, and I was in the trailer building shock absorbers for Jimmy, and we had Steve Levitt, building cars, doing our own twist fixtures, hanging bodies, doing paint bodies. We did everything. we were really a good race team, and we had continuity. Just the financial end was struggling, and but we sat on a lot of outside poles, and a lot of good races. Almost won Phoenix, and and that was really the best I felt throughout my career. And then the worst decision on my part to leave was more financially based, because I was struggling to get paid, and I was paying for the guys to get paid, and nobody really knew it, and we're just trying to hang on, and a tough decision, but probably the worst decision that I probably ever made. I just needed to keep trying to find more money and keep trying to stay there.
You regret leaving?
Yeah, I regret leaving. Yeah. I think because I loved the people. We were successful with limited money. Everybody was overachieving. All of us. And,
are you? What's your personal life like at this point?
Yeah, I have Renee, my first wife, and
so there's some pressure.
Yeah.
As a husband. Yeah,
I mean, she's got horses. We're in the horse thing, and she's hunting and jumping and doing things, and so and I'm not getting paid, and we're struggling to continue to do things. Yeah. And so there's pressure.
This may be my favorite time of the NASCAR season. It's when the on-track drama starts to ramp up, and each driver fights harder and harder, because each win might mean survival and a shot at the championship. And hard-fought battles on the track mean that this is also the time of the year when race-win diecasts from Lionel Racing really tell a story. These authentic replicas capture a particular moment in NASCAR history like no other collectible does. From each piece of confetti on the car, the tire marks, the scuff marks, the artists at Lionel do an incredible job making the race-to-win diecast look just like the real thing. These diecasts are incredibly authentic. Remember when the Trackhouse team put a giant taco on Daniel Suarez's car at Atlanta earlier this season? Well, Lionel Racing's Atlanta Win diecast has a taco on the hood too. I have Lionel Win diecasts in my collection, and you can too, by ordering them at LionelRacing.com, team stores, and authorized Lionel Racing dealers. And don't forget, you can find a wide selection of diecast at the Lionel stores in Concord Mills Mall near Charlotte Motor Speedway and Opry Mills Mall in Nashville. You end up going over to Bahari Racing, which was a solid team in its heyday, I guess. This was kind of in the backside of that team's program, if I remember correctly.
Yeah, it was. I kind of got to the deals either early or most of the time I got to them as they were starting to go over the top and start to go down the other side. But yeah, I got there in '98, at a time when Michael had left and Johnny Benson.
You got hurt.
Yeah.
What was the injury?
And when they repaved Atlanta.
You blew it right.
I was running third.
Yes,
I was running third.
I remember that.
We were hauling the mail, and
right
rear gave up, blew off the thing going into one, and backed it in the fence, and then the thing slapped the side, and I hit my head against the wall, and knocked me out. And I didn't wake up until I got in the hospital, and rib injuries and shoulder injuries and stuff. So that was my first big, major impact, right? But I drove, pretty much all year, with broken ribs, and struggled.
I imagine the head injury, made things a bit difficult for a while until that eventually clears up. I've talked to, we're a little more transparent these days than we were back then about those injuries. You don't want anyone to think of you as damaged goods. You're scared to tell anyone that you might have that type of injury because people were so unsure about it. And boy, if you say, man, I got a concussion, and then you go have a bunch of, you go have a couple bad races, people think that you're never going to return to your former self. Were you experiencing any of what I just described during that period?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I think that's the way I think you viewed it. That's the way I viewed it.
Yeah.
And I drove the whole year with broke ribs, and then I broke them again in California. I got in a wreck there with Chad, actually. Got put in the fencing and won. And I drove the whole year with broken ribs. And it's funny because that year, your father actually, had a full-time masseuse. And they were wrapping me, shaving me, wrapping me, and I was getting his masseuse to take care of me in the bus, and doing that all year long. And then eventually, I was lucky enough. We ran good all year, but it was tough and pain. And I ended up getting the pole in Charlotte at the end of the year, and kind of revived the sense that I could still do it, right?
Yeah.
So but it was a long, tough year.
You stayed with Bahari in '99. And eventually y'all would part ways. You ran for Eel River, and Larry Hedrick and different other teams. Started racing part-time. I want to get to where you ended up in the Xfinity car at Richmond. I want to get to that accident.
Mm-hmm.
I think this was 2003.
Yes.
I don't believe that I've ever seen a car hit the wall that hard. And I'm sure there's been some comparable accidents in our sports history. But what affected that accident have on you personally and physically?
Well, I've had some major injuries before that, when I first started driving, and then, the deal at Atlanta, right? I had just put together the friendlies deal with my own Cup team, my cousin Ernie, crew chief, and I was driving a Busch deal, and it was, not a well-prepared situation. And I had complained about the throttle pedal not having a stop. And, you know, it had one of the Hitchcock pedals that the bolt stuck too far out, and it had a vinyl mat. And in the race, it hooked the thread of the bolt in the mat and hung the throttle wide open, going off into one. And, you know, I was unfamiliar with the car, right, you know, and I went for the button, you know, to push the kill switch, and it was the wrong place. And there's no time. You're trying, and it's slow. Believe me, it felt slow. But I'm trying to find a way out of this, right? And I resigned myself to knowing that I'm going to have to just take the shot, you know, and I leaned in the headrest and took it, and instantly broke me up in pieces. Shattered my shoulder blade in 12 pieces, and Jesus. Broke my leg below the knee, broke my sternum, broke my ribs. I had vision problems in my left eye. I didn't get my eyes closed in time. I was still trying to find a way out of it, and of course I did not. And this time it didn't knock me out. Yeah. I was writhing in pain and knocked all the wind out of me, and didn't stop. And the throttle was still hung, and I didn't get stopped till turn 2. And at that point, you know, I was just trying to catch my breath.
Yeah, I watched that race a couple weeks ago, just coincidentally, and I just I don't know how you got out of there in as good a shape as you did.
Yeah.
And you talk about leaning into the headrest. Do you think that might have played a role in a more positive outcome? Because I asked that question because when I was going through my own head injuries, I had a good amount of room around my head in the headrest, particularly on the left side. I really just, you know, I felt like more often than not, I'm going to hit with the right front, and I just could do whatever I wanted with that gap there. And it could be I was going to lean and do all the things that I wanted, turning and looking, and got with some NASCAR people and was talking to them about how to get safer and what could I do? Is there anything I can do to make it where I can handle these crashes better? And they talked about closing up that gap, and what they wanted to happen really was for my head to be against the headrest when I hit the wall, not for me to sort of pull my head away from it as I'm getting ready to impact, so it would slap that headrest. And do you think that your intention to put your head against the headrest and absorb, you know, have that crash happen the way it did, was a positive outcome? Do you think about that at all?
Yeah, I've thought about it a lot. I think that through the years, you know, I've done a couple of things that not a lot of people always did. And if anybody's ever worked with me, you know, when I tightened myself in a car, I really couldn't eat or drink a lot before the race because I tightened the lap belt so tight. You know, most people, these kids these days, nobody does that, you know. And I actually would put a screwdriver in the ratchet deal and have them pull on as hard as they could. I kept ratcheting itself, so it just kept squeezing me. And then, you know, I ran that sternum strap deal as well, you know, later on, right? But I always held on the steering wheel. My dad said, just hold on the steering wheel, and he said, you hang on to it like that's your lifeline. And so every time I've ever had crashes, I mean, I've always had a steering wheel that ended up like that. Yeah. You know, I mean, pointing right at me. I couldn't get out of the car at Dover and places like that. And I think when I went for that deal, I'm short-necked, so I guess that's probably helped too, right? You know, I'm stalky, I'm short-necked, and but I tightened myself up like, you know, the point of being in misery and start the race. Yeah. And I think that, and then leaning into the headrest and just preparing for, you know, whatever was going to be thrown at me, right? And just, you know, fortunately enough, you know, I didn't hit anything. I didn't come out of the seat because I never hit anything. But just the impact itself of me, you know, going forward and then coming back, and the deal shattered my shoulder blade in 12 pieces. I mean, so the impact was, you know, significant.
It was massive.
Yeah, it was massive.
How do you, how long, I guess, before you were well enough to compete again?
I went back to Atlanta, I think, in 6 or 7 weeks. Yeah, I think it was 6 weeks. I struggled. The biggest thing was I had to, you know, be able to turn this big wheel, like a boat wheel, right, to get my shoulder rocked up.
You ran for a lot of different teams in different cars throughout the remainder of your driving career. A lot of guys will say, yeah, I'm not driving unless I can be in a winning a car. You know, I don't want to drive. Why were you motivated to still show up knowing the car you were getting in wasn't going to be able to do what you wanted it to do that day?
I think when I kind of like fell out of favor, right? And that was right after the Bahari deal, right? And I kind of fell out of favor. And the year 2000, well, the year your father was killed, right, is my first TV gig for Fox Sports Net. And I was doing the deal. And I was doing those interviews, you know, with people before the races and then the post-race stuff. And I was talking to people doing what I wanted to do. And I didn't want to do TV. I still hadn't had enough. I still didn't feel like, I felt like I had a lot left in me. I felt like I had a lot left to give, and I just needed somebody to believe in me. And the only way to do that was to do what my father always said: don't get outworked, you know, stay relevant, and then, you know, out of sight, out of mind. And that's what Ray Abraham told me, you know, when he started the Dodge deal out of my two buildings. He's like, you know, just, it's out of sight, out of mind. If you're not there, people don't know you still want to do it. So I just loved to drive a race car, period. Yeah. I don't care about anything else. I just wanted to drive the car. And, you know, I did everything else that I had to do, and I was good at it, but I had to do that just to be able to do it. And so I drove what I could drive, and, you know, you had to succumb to doing some start and parking and things like that when you didn't really want to. But I wanted to prove to people that I was a good qualifier. You know, I could manipulate a race car, not just drive it. And so I was driving subpar stuff, and I was sending people home and making races. And I wanted to show people that, hey, look, you guys have made a mistake. You should have invested in me. And that's really what I did. And then I just kept doing it because I loved it. And it's like, I'm not going to have nobody tell me I have to quit or, you know.
Yeah.
I did it because I loved it, and I still love it, and I miss it every day.
I was going to ask you, so how do you come to the decision? How do you finally make that choice that you're not going to do it again? I am in the middle of going through that process, knowing that the day's going to be coming sooner rather than later, where I will realize that I'm not good enough anymore, and that I physically or mentally don't have the sharpness and the ability to compete like I want. And so how hard is that choice to finally say you're done, like not ever going to do this again?
It's exceptionally difficult. It was for me, anyways, and I think it's been easier for some other guys, right? Yeah. But maybe they had more opportunities. They drove for higher echelon teams. They absorbed a lot in a period of time, and I just felt like that my time was short, and I didn't really get a chance to really be in a high echelon ride. I didn't have a chance to really showcase the potential I felt like I had long term with good teams. And so I kept trying. And then, you know, when I started the Starcom deal, it was an opportunity for me that they gave me. Matt Kohler and Bill Wollerman gave me a chance to drive that car. And when we got to it, I just felt compelled that, you know, we didn't have the money, and, you know, we bought a charter, started all this stuff, all this money being spent. And then there was a kid, you know, Kyle Weatherman come. We had Jeffrey in the car initially, right? And then we brought Kyle Weatherman, started helping us and working on us. And I see how much they want it, like I've always wanted it. So I took myself out of the car, and I gave opportunities to these kids and people to do things, you know, when I really wanted to be driving it and doing it. But, you know, you finally get a gift. The last deal, we go to Daytona and do that deal, and it doesn't go well, but I'll blow a tire. But you realize that you are in your late 50s, you know, and really, you know, I'm not going to have an opportunity to have anything good to drive, right? And you just kind of come to resign yourself to the fact that it really is over, and, you know, I need to give opportunity or be involved in things and build what I've learned and what I've gained out of it, you know, try to give back in some way, shape, or form. And so that's why I've kind of tried to help, you know, who I could help, and, you know, teach and instruct and try to get, I don't know, some sense of pleasure out of that, when all I really ever derived was driving the car physically. Yes. That was the only thing I really loved, and that's all I've ever done. Yeah. And if you think about it, you know, 5 decades in racing, and it's like, it's the only thing I really truly had passion for or cared about. And I mean, I'm tired of playing golf. I'm tired of doing anything else. I just want to go to the racetrack. Yeah. So,
Starcom, you bought a charter before people thought charters were worth anything. I want to understand what your involvement in the program was. What were you to Starcom?
Well, it's funny because when I drove for Bobby Allison, Mike and Matt Kohler were kids, and their uncle was the president of Mane and Tail Straight Arrow Shampoo, and so they grew up kids around me. And when I was driving for Jay Robinson and paying to drive the car, finding money just so I could drive, they sponsored me. They saw me on Facebook. They contacted our people, and they wanted to help me. And so we did the deal, and the thing didn't go well with Jay. I mean, we didn't get a lot out of what they did, and they were mistreated. And so they asked me if we could do our own deal. And I said, look, it takes a lot of money. You'll get emotionally invested. And I said, that's a struggle. Part of it is because it is a captivating and emotional deal. And I said, but, I will run all the numbers for you. I said, I'll show you all the things and you guys make the decision. But, and they did. They wanted to do it. So my wife and I, Alicia, started with not a bolt one and rented a little shop in Salisbury and started the Cup deal. And we started that thing. And I think in about 90 days, we went to Kansas. Mm-hmm. And, I didn't want to do it. I wanted to wait till the next year so I could build it right and start it right. But they wanted to go race. They got emotionally involved very quickly, which much to my dismay. And we bought a car from Darren Shaw and Beard and, went to Kansas. And, I had Tony Furr and Mike Chance. And, we had some suspension issues and things. But that's where we started. And then the next year, everybody said, well, you'll never be able to find a charter. It'll never happen, But I found one.
How?
Well, I had put a relationship together with RCR. I went up there and met with, all of them, Mike Dillon, Tony Galida, and with Richard. And I wanted to buy cars. I wanted to buy engines. And they wanted me to do an alliance and wanted me to do an engine program, lease deal and stuff. And I said, we don't have the money for that. And I said, we're buying everything fresh and new, and we don't have the capabilities for that. I said, I want to buy engines, but I'll guarantee you that you rebuild them all. And I said, I need a charter. And I said, I need to lease a charter or buy a charter. We want to buy one. And I said, you have the Menard charter there. And I said, we'd like to be able to find a way to procure that. So it was a long, drawn-out process, and they were trying to find money to start that third team and keep going, but the board was there and behind that whole thing, and I think we knew somebody on the board, and we were able to get it in there and kind of get a relationship, and they leased that Menard charter to us. And that was really the thing that really put us in a position to, become a stable fixture, because we were able to have guaranteed revenue. We were in every race, and we were starting from scratch, so we had a long road to hoe. And worked hard to try to pressure the situation to purchase that charter. And, the guys from Starcom and all of us wanted it badly. And it was 11th hour the following year when they decided to sell it to us, and we bought it. And, that was really what really kind of kept this thing going and really kind of got us to the point later on when we had to sell it.
Yeah. So did you do well when you sold the charter personally?
Yes.
Yeah. So that was a very nice, smart financial move. Do you think that do you believe in the charter system?
I think there are. Yes, I believe in the charter system. I think the way that it's structured and the way it was initially done was poor. It really never gave the owners what they were seeking. There was always caveats. And, I've been in all the meetings, all the owners' meetings and all the different things, they've got for the drivers and the owners and things. And, in my opinion, it has not been a true, franchising affair.
Right.
Right. And it's left everybody in a quandary on how to move forward. Right.
Right.
And even more so to this degree now. Mm-hmm. So I liked it because, if you put your effort forth, you had a guaranteed opportunity and the value, knowing business as I do, I knew that there was value long term in this. the biggest detriment, and I knew it going in. I didn't like it, and I had to work hard to keep it in the forethought of my mind, was the fact that the bottom three. And I felt like the bottom three scenario would be the biggest detriment to owning the charter for a team like ours.
Yeah.
And it ultimately was our demise.
What do you mean?
Well, we were forced financially at the time, to, we were running it out, on the charter money.
Yep.
And what money that we had from Starcom. But then what happens is that you start not finishing races where you need to. Well, of course, the money dwindles because of your non-finishes where you finish in points. So, the money that you were making initially is not the money you're making per race towards the end because of your finishes. So we were forced to look outside for drivers that have money that could fund the racing, which in this day and age is how all the sports really are, right? You're actually, unless you can procure or keep long-term relationships with entities, but it still comes down to young guys coming in and bringing money, right?
Yeah.
So we had to look outside and go for drivers that could bring funding, right? And that undermined our capabilities to have the higher talented drivers keep us in a position to escalate the earnings and to showcase potential for sponsorship. So, but it also put us in a position to be in the bottom three
to lose the charter.
And there was other teams that did that first, but they never elected to enforce it.
Were they going to enforce it?
They were going to.
With you?
Yes.
And so you were like, hey, I'm going to lose this charter, so I have to sell it. Does that affect your ability to sell it for what you believe it to be worth? Because it's kind of like an NFL team that wants to trade a player and get a little value, but the rest of the NFL will just wait for them to cut the player to be able to get the player off of waivers without having to make the trade. So, if other teams know that you might lose this or could lose this, I guess you might be trying to keep that information private so that other teams wouldn't drop the bid or the purchase price of the charter. Was that challenge ever in play?
Well, it was a little different for us simply because nobody, the other people before us that had already, been in that position and nothing had transpired. So I think the temperament and the belief was that they weren't going to do that.
Yeah.
And I think that's what they tried to put out there. But I think that, so we were being inundated with people wanting to buy our charter.
Oh.
And the numbers kept escalating.
Yeah.
And to levels of that, they knew we were not as proficient. We had drivers in there we really couldn't, run up front with, right? So everybody was, it's like blood in the water. Somebody wants to do something.
Yeah.
But NASCAR, I think, was at a time where there was such an influx of, guys like Michael Jordan and people, yourself or whatever, that really were looking to take their high-level Xfinity teams or whatever and go to the next level and have the Cup program. So I think there was pressure internally to have the best possible core of teams. Like you want the best group of football teams.
Sure.
And, right? So I think there was that sense or feel that that's what, NASCAR wanted. Mm-hmm. And so I think they kind of started to get to a point where, there was so much pressure of people wanting to come in and be there, and they wanted those people in, that they were going to be pressured, I think, at some point to make a decision. And like they always do, there's always a scapegoat.
Yeah.
In anything, a crew chief, a driver, sponsors, there's always a scapegoat or the first guy that takes the brunt. Kind of like Austin Dillon's situation here. There's a guy that is the first guy that, initiates the difference.
Yeah.
And so that happened to us. I mean, we had conversations, and pretty much it was pretty evident that if we did, we had another year to go. This is early enough that we had another year to go, but pretty much was the fact that if we couldn't make it happen the next year, we were not going to retain this, and we would lose everything.
Yeah.
So at that point, we had to look for what our options were. Could we find an alliance? Could we find a way that we could, get the team better in a short period of time? And this was late. And the guys, I think, were just, I think they were so disappointed and so disillusioned that they had stepped up and, put a new team to the deal, young. I mean, aesthetically, when you looked at us, we looked like as good as anybody out there. We had the look, everybody, the cars were nice. I mean, we performed on every level except we just didn't have the talent or the funding to keep the car, up there. Yeah. Our business model was one of making money more so than it was, being as successful, right? Yeah. So, it was just a choice that I think the boys had kind of come to that, and they asked me, what do we do? And I, the offers were out there that were significant, and I said, you guys are all young. You guys have families, young children. And I said, you have a business, but, this is a life-changing moment, and, they weren't racers. They were, they didn't come up like I have or whatever, like you have, right? And they're business people, and they dealt with it as a business. I ran it within its means, and I did what I was asked. And I just said, look, if there's a stand, you lose it. If we don't put more money in it and we don't put the effort forth and get an alliance and do everything to the fullest degree and pay a driver, it won't happen. Yeah. I said, the choice is yours. Yeah. And they made it.
Do you miss, so that was effectively the end of your NASCAR career to date. I mean, there's always more opportunities out there, something that may draw you back. How have you managed having this sort of break or separation from the stock car world? I know that you're involved in Trans Am and all these other things, and so you're definitely keeping the competitive mind going, and that's probably doing a lot of great things for you. But does it matter what kind of car it is, or where the racetrack's at, or what kind of racetrack it is, as long as it's motorsports?
To some degree, it is. I think, you still I just love being at the racetrack. I mean, that's where I've spent the majority of my life, day in and day out, the Cup schedule. I mean, it's week in and week out. And so I missed that. I missed the people. I missed the camaraderie. And I missed the Starcom guys because we were more family than anything, right? And so we'd always go to dinners, and, I didn't really drink at all before these guys much, so now they're into wine, and so we're drinking, Camus and, Opus One, and having tomahawks, and so we're having fun, going out dancing, with the girls and the wives and stuff. So my wife and I and them, we just enjoyed each other to the greatest degree of the word. So missing that, and then we talked about earlier about not really absorbing or really knowing how great it was when you had it. You realize that when it's not there. So, my boys, all the Starcom guys, we talk about it all the time because we always go up there and see them. And, we're doing this little TCR IMSA car, the Michelin Pilot Challenge Series. So we talk all the time. We all miss it. We all miss going to the racetrack. We all miss being together. And that is hard. It really is difficult to put it down, especially for my wife and I, because, I personally have done it for a long time. Yeah. And she got enthralled in it, and she's a major, force behind what I've done, and very supportive. And so, it's hard. It's not the same. And there's NASCAR and everything, other types of forms of racing don't do it the same way, and the atmosphere and the people, and it's not the same. Yeah. To me.
I'm curious, I'll get heckled a little bit for asking this question, but I'm curious if you'd ever considered, so I mean, you came up through the short track ranks. Had it ever occurred to you at 60 years old or at 65 years old? I mean, enough to be able to put together a reasonably enjoyable program at the short track level, at the grassroots level. To still compete, even if you wanted to drive, in a late model stock or something of that nature, weekly racing. Had it ever crossed your mind? Because I asked that question because I went back to late model stocks where I began racing in the early 90s, because I remember that time as being the most fun. Now, I wanted to get to Cup, and I loved every minute of being a Cup, but it was hard and pressure and cutthroat, and then I got there and I was like, I didn't enjoy that little stuff I did as much as I should have. I was too worried, and too naive and too stupid. And I want to go back one day because I need to enjoy that. I miss that. And the people that are there at those races are doing it simply for the love of it. There's no other reason for them to be there. And I've enjoyed that. It's been what I thought it would be. And a lot of times, when you try to go back and recreate things, it's never as good as it was.
Right.
But this has been. Had you ever considered, maybe you don't need to be on that main stage, and maybe you can get what you're looking for somewhere else? And I mean, I know you are with the IMSA and so forth. I'm not wanting to say you're not. I don't want you to have to defend that, but had you ever considered, I guess, short track racing?
Well, I certainly, had to do a lot of soul searching, and discussions. Alicia and I talked a lot about it pretty much every day and every night, and we snuggle on the couch. Next thing you know, we're talking about what are we going to do? What do we want to do? And I think when I was growing up and starting to try to make my way, I drove basically a cup car my whole career. Because the cup cars in Winston West, the late model sport, they were all that style of car.
Yeah.
The heavy, I never really wanted to drive Xfinity or Busch Grand National. I mean, okay. I didn't drive my first Xfinity race until Davey was killed, and Red Farmer and Bobby asked me to drive that car, and we go to win the third race. I go to Loudon and we win.
Yeah.
And so I'd never really had a desire. I didn't want to drive cup cars, Xfinity cars, trucks. I wanted to drive cup cars. I wanted to go fast. I loved restrictor plate racing. I loved Daytona and Talladega. I loved the thrill, the sensation, the emotion that it did, and Michigan and, Pocono. I loved, driving those fast races. That's what I loved. I didn't want to go slow. I didn't want to do the other things. Really, it didn't interest me.
Yeah.
So to answer the question, it's really about what I got out of driving the cup car. When I drove, the GTP car in the 24 Hours of Daytona, I loved it because you had to drive. The harder you drove it, the more it pressed you and the more it demanded of you. So I liked things that it demanded your expertise and your total focus, and it thrilled you.
Yeah.
And I just don't think those other cars, when I've driven them and done them, I mean, I did that as a means to get to this point. So, I mean, if I could buy a car and I could do something, if I ever came back, or if we came back collectively, it would probably be Xfinity. It's just simply because you get to go to the places that, I wouldn't probably drive, but I would want to be a part of an entity that would come back and run, a limited Xfinity deal or something like that, simply because now, after doing the other things that I tried to fill the void with, I don't fill the void with it. It doesn't, going to road races and doing all that stuff there. I loved helping kids and doing it, but it doesn't fill the void.
Yeah.
Xfinity racing, I've done it. I've drove in it. I know how difficult it is. I know what it takes, and it has escalated. So if I was going to come back, Cup is out of the realm.
Yes.
But Xfinity would be the next and only place that I probably would look at doing anything further.
Gotcha. Well, man, I've really enjoyed this conversation, Derrike.
Me too.
I've always appreciated you and your impact and the mark you left on our sport. Everybody has a different impression that they leave, and you've affected people's lives that you've worked with and done a lot of good over the course of your career in the driver's seat and as an owner. In this sport as well. So, and you continue, like you say, you continue to shape some of the younger drivers that are trying to come up into the ranks. I know you've worked with Connor Zilich and a couple other people. Connor, one of the drivers that'll race for us next year in the Xfinity Series. We're very excited. But I was excited and looking forward to talking to you today. I'm thankful that you come here and gave us some time, and I appreciate you, buddy.
Well, I appreciate the opportunity to come. You've got a wonderful platform here, and you do a lot of great things. You shed a lot of light on everybody. Everybody has a story, and you've been able to shed light on that and let them give their perspective on things. So it's well done. I'm proud of what you've done.
Thank you very much. Derrike Cope on the Dale Jr. Download. So that was a great conversation with Derrike Cope, and had been wanting to talk to him and get him in here because of his unique perspective as a Daytona 500 champion, and one of a driver that only won 2 races in his career, one of them being the biggest race of the year. And then, again, his involvement in Starcom and how all of that went down and whether he felt like at the end when they did sell, whether he profited from that, right? So it was a good conversation. I enjoyed it. And I wonder, I wanted to ask him this. So we talked about his Daytona 500 win, and then, which was great, a great conversation. And then I wanted to credit him and say, you did go to Dover and win again to prove, and not in a fluky way, like you won. You led a lot of laps and had a really great strategy in a fast car. I remember I was there. I was looking at the scoreboard, and I'm like, holy Bob, Mike Whitcomb, my buddy, his car's going to win this race. And I remember being down in the garage. I feel like Dad might have had some kind of an engine issue or something. We were way out of the race. And I was in the garage. I was in my Goodwrench uniform doing something. And I remember looking at the scoreboard, and I don't know who was second, but it was somebody in second, right? And I watched, and I could see the cars go by in a little window between the haulers or between something obstructing my view in the garage. And I said, there goes Derrike Cope, and then a bunch of other cars, and then a bunch of other cars, and a bunch of other cars. And then finally, here comes second place. I was like, he's way out in front. Damn, he's going to win. But anyhow, I was like, you won that race not in a fluky way. And then he said moments later, he brings up how tough the response was to his Daytona win and how people thought it was a fluke. And I hope that he didn't think that I thought it was a fluke, because I remember him, like, he ran second all day long. He corrected me, and he was like, he was kind of like fifth or sixth all day, but we got to second late in the race, and we're there for when Dad had problems. He was able to capitalize, but I wouldn't call it a fluke. I would say it's more Cinderella-esque, and maybe that's comfortable because of the car being pink. But it is a bit of a Cinderella win, like a Sweet 16, a deep run college team in the March Madness upsetting the Giants. I mean, that's what happened. That's what it was. Fluke? No, because the car was fast, and they did a great job all day. A fluke is, the whole field pitting and you staying out and rain coming and you win the race, which several drivers have won races that way. But they performed all day. And, man, I didn't know that they had such pushback. Even though, to his point, it wasn't in this new age of social media, which would have been relentless, even back then. And just like, the news articles and published articles in papers and the Winston Cup scene, there was a bunch of pushback that really left them a bit bewildered and disappointed, frankly. And I'm sure a lot of that was coming from the disappointment of Earnhardt fans and the industry as a whole that Dad had the flat tire, right? Everybody wanted Dad to win the Daytona 500. He was Dale Earnhardt and larger than life, and there was one thing that one of the greats hadn't done, and it was win that race. And so everybody wanted him. I think, maybe I was biased. I thought everybody wanted him to win it at some point, which he would. But, man, that 1990 Daytona 500 was devastating. And I wanted to ask Derrike his real-time experience, like as he's driving down the back straightaway and whatever flies out from under that car, what he thought, what he saw, what went through his mind when that was happening. So it's awesome that he remembers it. I love it for him that he still has that clear memory of every sort of moment as he's driving that car down into turn 3. And I know as a guy's hit a few walls and had some head injuries, and Derrike's had some himself, and a lot of drivers, majority of race car drivers are going to experience that at some point. In old age, plays a big role as well. You know, you forget some of the real details of those moments, 20, 25, 30 years, 40 years away. You don't retain some of the true, real gritty details of those final couple of laps in a very important day of your life. But I'm glad he does. It's good for him. It was fun to talk to him about retirement. I know that I talked to a lot of people about that on here, and I'm trying to figure out a way that those conversations might help me in the coming years, as I eventually have to make a decision that I won't race anymore, and I'll have to put that way down the list of priorities. Yeah, so I enjoyed it. It was a lot of fun, and I want to make sure that we thank Ally for the opportunity to talk to Derrike today. Ally brings us the guest segment every single week, and we appreciate everything they do for us here at Dirty Mo Media and the Dale Jr. Download, and also everything that Ally does in the sport of NASCAR. They're a sponsor that makes a lot of waves and does a lot of great things that keep this big machine moving down the road. And fans and myself, we should definitely be thankful and supportive of them because of that. Their involvement in the sport, they make the sport better. No matter what you're saving for, whether it's tickets to the next race, a new car, a new home, we're all better off with an Ally. Let's get to the white flag. All right, so as we mentioned yesterday in the Tuesday Dirty Air segment, you know, all of our shows are dropping this week as they traditionally do. The Teardown on Monday with Jeff Gluck and Jordan Bianchi. Those two go at it around start times and all kinds of great debates. And I love the sort of way they challenge each other, and they truly bring up some great points on both sides of each argument. Actions Detrimental and Denny Hamlin and Door Bumper Clear, all of that came out earlier this week. Make sure to tune in, check out those shows if you haven't listened to them already. Dirty Air, our show yesterday. And then Speed Street with Connor Daly and Chase Holden, that drops today along with this episode. Tomorrow, DJD Reloaded and Dirty Mo Doe. Dirty Mo Doe will be prepping all of us for the upcoming race at Daytona and some of the best bets to make in a very tricky moment of the season, a very difficult race to make clear, concise, confident bets. I would definitely be listening to Dirty Mo Doe in times like this. The Dirty Mo Summer Games are all available, all 8 episodes, on the Next Level with Andrew Curlin YouTube page. So go there, check that out. The bus race dropped over the weekend. Andrew takes the big win home. I don't know, am I spoiling this? Yes, I think so. But it's in the copy, so I'm reading it. Andrew will also be at Daytona with our friends at Hellman's in the Fan Zone interviewing you, the fans. You're going to see Andrew if you go to the Daytona race and get in the Fan Zone. Big prizes and giveaways coming with that as well. Andrew, you want to give us a specific time on where fans can find you in the Fan Zone?
Yeah, you can go to the Fan Zone, the Hellman's display, which is in between the Toyota and Exalta gates, and I'll be there from 4 to 6 p.m. on Friday, 2:30 to 4:30 on Saturday, interviewing the fans. DBC's doing a Q&A on Saturday. Justin Allgaier's doing a Q&A on Friday, and like I said, we've got some pretty sweet prizes we're giving away.
We have a 5-star Apple review coming up here from 2TW. They say, my weeks are made by listening to Dale and his guests discuss the history of the sport I love. From guest hosts like Amy and Kelly, this podcast is inviting to everyone because of all of the perspectives in the studio. We appreciate that, and we're glad you're having fun. We're having fun, and we're going to keep on having fun. But that's it for me. Make sure you tune in tomorrow for DJD Reloaded and everything else we got going on this week. But I'm out of here. We'll see you next week.